Good morning and welcome to this webinar focusing on practical actions that businesses can take to reduce their energy bills and carbon emissions. My name is Johnny Sadler. I'm the Strategic Decarbonisation Manager at Electricity Northwest. For those of you who don't know us, we run the electricity network across the region. So we're responsible for about 35,000 miles of overhead lines, underground cables, pylons and substations that distribute electricity to 2.4 million homes and businesses across the region. And I'm delighted to be invited by my colleagues at the Growth Company this morning to steer us through this next hour to provide you online with the information you need to start to take practical action to reduce your energy bills. Couple of stats for you perhaps before we get moving. These figures I'm sure will be very familiar to many of you online. If we'd had this conversation 12 months ago, and I'd said to you, in 12 months' time, your energy bills will be increasing by 2, 3, 4, 5, even 10 times their current levels, I suspect many of you online wouldn't have believed me. Unfortunately, that's the situation we find ourselves in today. We have essentially a 6-month grace period in the form of the Energy Bill Relief Scheme, which government have introduced, which we talked about on last week's session. And essentially what that says is we're going to cap energy bills for businesses and domestic customers for a period of 6 months. And that should give you enough time to get your house in order, because beyond that, bills will be increasing again to really significant levels. So that's why we're really keen to get information, advice and guidance in front of you today. The other stat I'll share with you before we jump in today's agenda, 63% of businesses in Greater Manchester are saying that the biggest thing that they need to be able to get on their journey to reduce their energy bills and carbon emissions is access to more information, advice and guidance. So that's exactly what today's session is here to do. And what we hope we'll be able to do is by 10 o'clock, we'll send you away with some really practical information and advice and a set of contacts you can pick up on, so that when you get back to your desk, back to your boardrooms, you'll be able to start implementing what you've heard about on this morning's call. Okay. Look, a couple of other things before we get going. Today's one of a series of webinars organised by Business Growth Club Hub colleagues. We had the Energy Bill Relief Scheme last week. You can still watch that on YouTube, and there'll be a series of sessions after today as well, which we'll talk about at the back end. Okay, so let's get into it. We've got a stellar lineup for you this morning. We're going to kick off with Alistair D.L. Job, who's going to walk you through some of the practical hints and tips in terms of actions you can take. We're then going to move on to John McCorrigan from Ellard, who's going to talk about a really exciting project that they're delivering at the moment on one of their buildings in the south of Manchester. We're then going to move on to Vicky Wilding, who's going to talk to you about local suppliers of low carbon technologies to help you reduce your bills. And then we're going to finish up with Phoebe Baker from the Pilot Group talking about environmental management systems. So a really exciting panel for you today. And what we'll also do at the back end was we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes to pick up any questions throughout the session. So please do use the chat function throughout today. We won't be breaking the flow of the presentations, but we'll store all of those questions.
Right, looks like we might have lost Johnny there for a second. So I'm going to take over and start my presentation. So thank you, Johnny. Yeah, as mentioned, there'll be a sort of catch up of questions at the end. So do put them in the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. So as Johnny mentioned, Alistair D.L. Job, I'm the one of the sustainability and net zero advisors within the Business Growth Hub. What I'm going to cover today is a relatively quick flow through some of the energy efficiency actions you can do now. So as he mentioned, we've got this 6 months grace, 6 months window. What is it you can do today, tomorrow, next week, in the next 6 months to prevent and to limit those shocks that are going to come in the form of energy bills rising in 6 months' time. So key one to note here is the cheapest energy. When we're talking last week about the future forecasts, about energy prices, looking at brokers and a good quality contract, well, the cheapest price you can pay for any electricity is that which you don't use. So we want to focus on energy efficiency measures, really trying to look at some of those low cost and no cost options as well, rather than necessarily big financial investments, but we'll talk about that a little bit further down the road. So in terms of the first thing to talk about, again, I did mention this last week, but it is vital that you get people on board. You have to make sure that you bring your staff within your business along on this journey. The key points of this, we discussed the benefits in last week's session, but this is really the what and the how. So one thing you need to do is level with people right now and say, this is a problem within the business, and it may well be that you need to use some relatively strong tactics in terms of understanding the risks if they don't act on this now. Gather a team together, make sure you've got a good coherent understanding of what you might need within that energy and or environmental team. If you don't have anything like that at the moment, gather a group together of like-minded individuals who want to focus on energy reductions. Look at surveying and getting kind of staff suggestions, because the people who work on the shop floor, who are at the front of the coalface of your organization, are the very best people to come up with the ideas to save energy. So they will be working with the equipment, or in the offices, they'll be using all the printers and the lighting. They are the very best people to talk to about what those ideas might be and potential limitations. You may or may not need any form of sort of incentives, but obviously any sort of competitions or prizes or groups that you set up are a really good way to make sure that there's that sort of element of urgency. And then the really important one at the very end of this process and all the way through what you're trying to achieve is continuous feedback. You need to make sure that people see the results of what they're doing. You can't physically see electricity. So if you want them to understand what they are doing has worked and then progress this forward and make further changes, you need to give that feedback. So we're going to look at a few of the uniform technologies across all companies, rather than digging too deeply into some of the specifics for, say, manufacturing or chemicals or food companies. We're looking at lighting at the first stage. So one of the key ones we want to look at is giving people responsibility or authority to switch things off, lighting being one of them, where they can do. So one of the key points within lighting is it can represent up to 40% of your building's energy use, possibly even more if you're a warehouse or it's office-based. It could be 50%. Typically speaking, in the region of 30% of your energy is going to be on lighting. So make sure you don't use it when you don't need it. Make perfect use of that natural light coming through those skylights or the blinds and raise those. Make sure you that you clean any of those skylights and windows to get the most amount of natural light in where you can. Labeling switches is obvious one, but it makes it clear to see if you've got a massive bank of switches that people know which ones they can and can't switch off. And then what about the lighting levels in different work areas? So maybe that you don't need a really bright light everywhere across your site, your factory, your shop, or your office. And it might be that you could actually have task lighting in certain areas that improves the light level in that area, but the rest of it can be of a lower light level. Then in terms of some of the slightly more costly work, you might want to look at lighting level controls. So the sort of PIR sensor to control where people are within an office. Storerooms are great, toilets, corridors. You don't need lights on all the time in those corridors. And you can put sensors on to make sure that lighting. Now, typically speaking, it's in the region of 30% for any kind of lighting control. That's how much you can save. In an office, it can be obviously more, up to 50% savings are possible. So relatively low cost, 15, 20 quid to buy one of these sensors. And then in terms of the electrical time to fit it, not a huge amount more than that. So your return is typically within a few months of installing sensors. Then you obviously want to then look at maybe a bigger project and look at your lighting replacements. If you've not already got LED fittings, it's a very, very quick return on investment. Even an office or a 9 to 5 shop, lighting can typically, you get your money back within 1 year. So a really good investment to make if you do need to. Looking at heating, it's an often overlooked one. Obviously, as we're coming into the heating season at the moment, you need to make sure that all controls, timers, thermostats are properly set. There's obviously a key one coming up soon with daylight saving time. You need to make sure your timers are adjusted accordingly for that hour. But a really interesting one is that 1% reduction, 1 degree reduction in temperature saves 8% off that heating bill. Just to put that into perspective, that could easily wipe off all of the gas that we used to buy from Russia. We don't obviously buy anymore, but in terms of solving certain problems, it's really relatively small changes, and most people will not notice 1 degree difference. Make sure you don't obstruct things like the radiators, and don't heat rooms that don't need to be. So they may be sort of corridors can be lower temperature than, say, potentially offices, and the like. I would eliminate all portable electric heaters if I could get rid of them completely. They're very wasteful and they tend to get left on over the weekends without you knowing. Draft proof where possible, so putting seals around doors, windows if they're not already fully sealed, and insulate your cylinders, pipe work, which can be a very, very low cost, very quick, a matter of weeks for that payback in terms of getting your money back on that insulation. So that's the sort of quick wins, the cheapest stuff to do. And you can see here one really good example of an insulated, very nicely lagged hot water cylinder. I think this looks like it's in a factory. On the left, you've got the normal picture, but you can see on the right-hand side that uninsulated pipe work is, I think it's up to something like 70 degrees. So it's losing quite a lot of heat out of that. It's a really quick and easy one to do. Now, obviously, that is giving heat into the factory during winter, but you don't want that in the summer because that's just wasteful for that hot water cylinder. So further investment maybe needed in these areas. If you have a roller shutter door on a warehouse, a factory, or even just doorways in shops or in a pub, it might be, you can interlock the controls of those roller shutter doorways with the heating control. So obviously what this does is it makes sure that if the doorway is open, the heater is off, the blower heater is off. And obviously when the doorway is down, it comes back on again. It's a really good incentive to make sure that the doors are only open for the period of time they need to be. And obviously you're not wasting that energy by the warm air blown heat just going straight out of those doorways. A relatively simple one, relatively low cost, is a destratification fan. So that's the image in the bottom there. What that does is as warm air rises into higher spaces, maybe it's a workshop or a warehouse, pushing that air back down means you get uniform air temperatures distributed across that height, and it means you can set your thermostats lower, reduce gas consumptions and energy consumption. And then obviously, as we're moving towards a electrification of heating in general, it's worth looking at heat pumps, and they can be remarkably effective even in larger open spaces, smaller workshops, and commercial properties. Obviously, a lot of offices have heat pumps already, so it might be looking, for example, at your heating system and seeing whether you need to have a boiler or whether you can actually use the existing air source heat pump system you've got already in there, the air conditioning system. Okay, so in terms of equipment, whether it's office equipment, whether it's compressors, motors, maintenance, you mustn't forget maintenance in your in this sort of pressure to save cost right now. Maintenance of equipment is still really important because it can extend the lifespan of your equipment, your motor, your machinery, your cars even. Extend that lifespan of it means you don't have to replace it as soon, but obviously also it vastly improves the efficiency of the working of that. So for example, do you need that copier on overnight, weekends? Do you need to have all those PC monitors on all over the weekends? Can they all, making sure they're all switched off when they're not needed? And then, for example, in a manufacturing setting, looking at compressed air leaks, even just one pinhead leak in a garage, a workshop, can cost up to £2,000 a year now on today's prices. Check your pressures. Do you need to run compressed air at all, and do you need to have it at that sort of pressure? And then in terms of filters, that could be in an air handling system, an air conditioning unit. Make sure you replace those filters and service them regularly, because that service and maintenance schedule, whilst costly, will pay for itself more than double, 3 times over the year of its life before the next service. So that's the basics on the maintenance side of things. But one key issue we do tend to see gets forgotten with, for example, I don't know, it might be a dry cleaners, or a hotel or a hospice, and they've got some tumble dry, and they tumble dry in their linen, or it might be a compressor like in this example, and they're looking at the lowest cost option to buy that new machine. So one's broken, they need to buy a new one. So what you tend to get is, I want the cheapest that's just about going to do the job, that's relatively reliable, that we won't have to replace too soon. What they don't see is this massive amount of cost that is swallowed up with energy to run that machine, that motor, that tumble dry, whatever it might be, and making sure you consider the whole life cost of that equipment before you make your purchasing decisions. By making a small increase in cost to the next or the most efficient model of whatever equipment you might be buying, can make a massive difference in the energy consumption. And in fact, that marginal cost difference can pay for itself within a matter of weeks. So if you are having to replace equipment, you are looking to replace anything that uses energy, have a look at its efficiency. And if you can afford to, I would always try to go that little bit higher, because the cost savings will be with you within a matter of weeks, if not months. So one thing we've always queried with making investments, for example, in a new compressor or vehicles, whatever it might be, is how are we going to finance all this? And that's a really good question. The answer is quite varied, and obviously depends on circumstances within your business. But generally speaking, it's easier to look at this than you might at first think. One of the first things you need to look at is the business case. So what we've got here is understanding that it's going to cost, save energy on our bill, and that's what you can see at the top there. But hidden below that investment are all the other reasons why you might want to replace your lighting. You might want to replace a motor on a production line. You might want to replace some form of equipment within your business. And these are all the additional potential benefits you can see. So it might be that it lasts longer, it has a greater improvement in your output, your productivity, and it can secure future work with whatever it's doing. Okay, so in terms of that ammunition, you've got that to try and go to, for example, a finance manager, or to discuss the project and to look at those potential increased energy savings. In terms of where you can get that funding from, the various finance options. So if you haven't got the cash in the bank at the moment, then it's looking at how you fund or finance. For example, it might be a solar panel system on your roof with potentially battery storage. How are you going to finance and fund that scheme? Well, obviously you can go to the high street lenders, and most of them have got some form of green finance scheme, and asset financing if that's not feasible for the project. So you go to the provider of the technology, and they will provide you with asset finance schemes. But one thing to look at here is making sure this small chart you see in front of you, making sure when you look at the project, you get the cost savings sitting higher per month or per week or per year. You make sure your cost savings in pounds and pence is higher by 20-30% of the repayments on that. So what that means is you don't have to spend out money out of your cash reserves up front, but what you can do is you can be cash positive from day one. So that 20% is that 20% of the overall cost savings in your back pocket from day one, without really having to dig into your reserves. So those are the potential financing solutions, and there's obviously a huge amount more to cover in terms of cost of these projects. And I'm well aware that it's not necessarily going to be a cheap process, but this is about building resilience, about building strength to go forward towards the in your energy efficiency journey. So just from my point of view, a summary, as we've mentioned before, around about 50% of the opportunities that we see as energy efficiency, energy saving opportunities have low or no cost to implement, but you really do need to have your staff and your people on board to make this happen. So there's still time, as Johnny said earlier, but there is no time to waste. So I urge you to take actions. There's loads more information out there, and obviously you can contact us for any further advice on energy efficiency projects.
Wonderful. Alistair, thank you very much. And as a man who spends a lot of time out and about on the ground talking to businesses every day, some really helpful practical hints and tips there for businesses. And I can see we've already got a load of questions coming through, so hopefully be able to come back to those at the back end. I particularly like the point that you made around get your people on board. This can't just be a top-down management-driven initiative.
Yeah.
It's got to be something that not just involves, but actually excites the whole of the workforce within a business. So hopefully we'll be able to pick up that bit of the conversation a little bit later on. But for now, thank you very much, Alistair. Wonderful. I'm going to move us on to our next item now, where we're going to step into a short conversation with John McCorrigan. John's the Director of Business Transformation at a company called Ellard, and I'm delighted to be able to pick up our conversation again, John, that we started earlier in the year. You were at a really exciting stage of your journey to getting on top of your energy bills and carbon emissions. So looking forward to finding out more about where you've got to this morning. Before we get into that, though, could you give us a little bit of an introduction to Ellard and your role there?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, Johnny. Good morning, everybody else. Ellard are a trading company based in Wythenshawe in South Manchester, and we sell motors and control packages to the industrial door, roller shutter, garage door, blind and gate industries. We sell business to business. We import motors and controls from Europe and China. So, and we serve our customers on a next day delivery basis. So naturally, our warehousing operation is absolutely paramount to us. In terms of net zero, I was the finance director for 18 years, but I took on the challenge. I had a succession plan in place. As you can tell, I'm not the youngest chicken on the block. But I took on the challenge to help Ellard meet its sustainability challenge. And at Ellard, we have 3 goals: an environmental one, which is net zero; people, which is 100% engagement; and just as important, profitable growth. And I think that's the bit that came through from Alistair's presentation before. Reducing your carbon emissions doesn't have to cost you anything. In fact, it can actually make you money.
Fantastic. So where do you come at this from then? So you're finance director for 18 years. You talked about the three goals there for Ellard: an environmental one, a people one, and a profitable one, and a profit one. Where does this morning's conversation fit for you? Which one of those boxes does this conversation fall into, or is it a little bit of all of them?
It's a little bit of all of them, Johnny. To be honest, when we started, what we actually realised was we needed to. Our scope 3 emissions are our biggest issue in Ellard. You know, actually getting the product, bringing it particularly from China into the UK, and then distributing it to our UK and our export customers across the globe. So they're our biggest hitters, but we needed something fast. We need something to gain traction, not only with the sustainability team that we created, but also to show some improvement to our employees that we were actually trying to make a difference. We put in various policies, such as moving away from internal combustion engine cars into electric or hybrid vehicles, put charging infrastructure in place. We've even put an EV salary sacrifice scheme in for the staff. But of course, that's going the wrong way from an energy point of view. We're actually increasing our energy usage. So we then started to look at how we could actually get those real quick hits to drive down the energy consumption. The first was we switched from standard tariff electricity to 100% renewable. And at that point, we smashed our CO2 goals. We didn't really have to do anything beyond that. But that's not the point. The profitable growth side then took over. How could we actually reduce those costs, move over? As Alistair said, LED panel replacement in the ceilings that we had. We've just done them as the bulbs run out, and actually the price of LED panels has fallen so much over the last 2 years. It's almost as cheap to replace with a new panel as it is to put in 3 replacement bulbs. I mean, we're fortunate we have our own electricians that help us do that, but they've got on board with it because they know that they're making a difference. But the next stage for us to really reduce is to put on a solar roof. We have a 30,000 foot warehouse. And so the idea was, if we can do that, not only do we reduce our carbon footprint again, because we could end up exporting back to the grid, but it would totally insulate ourselves from the future energy increases that we're going to have.
Superb. So if I just pick back through, I think some of the headlines I've heard from you there, we're stepping into doing the some of the more exciting, some people might describe as the solar PV, generating your own energy, getting some panels on the roof. But before you got to that stage, you very much got the basics right. You've been replacing your lighting with LEDs. You've been doing some of the more basic energy management stuff. Can you just share a couple of thoughts with colleagues on the call this morning in terms of what's the right order to do all of this in, John? Would you recommend people jump to the solar PV in the first instance, or are there a few more kind of slightly more basic steps you'd encourage first of all?
I think it's going to depend very much on everybody's particular circumstances. We don't own our building. It's actually owned by a landlord. So we actually went to some of the smaller stuff while the discussions took place with the landlord to say, look, we'd like you to pay and put solar roof on our building. Yes, we understand you'll increase our rent. And it's very much a tripartite agreement in actually trying to get that solution sorted. But when we redesigned and moved into our building back in 2013, so we actually had most of the building on sensors at that point. We were actually, like to say, forward thinking enough to do that at that point. But we didn't put in LEDs because at that time LEDs were very, very expensive. So we're now sort of going back full circle, if you like, backtracking on some of the decisions that we should have taken, but actually didn't do on a cost basis at that time.
Sure. And it's not always the one that gets people hugely excited, is it? The some of the more basic, simple energy management stuff, but getting those sensors in, getting a really good understanding of the energy that you're using at the outset puts you in a much better position when it comes to actually starting to design interventions to reduce those bills. So that would certainly, I think we heard a little bit of that in Alistair's presentation as well, and I'd certainly add a bit of weight to that one. You can't manage what you don't measure. I know it's something we've heard time and time again, but when it comes to energy, it's absolutely the case. I've got a last couple of questions for you, John, before we move on to the next item. Really positive, really excited to hear about the journey that LRs are on. I suspect, though, there've probably been a couple of bumps in the road along the way. So are there anything that you'd be happy to share this morning that might help to make the journey a little bit smoother for colleagues who are looking to follow in your footsteps?
Absolutely. I think the first one, and Alistair remarked on it, was actually trying to get the information. And I think our journey really took a big bump up when we joined the Business Growth Journey to Net Zero cohort at the beginning of this year. It just gave us a much better framework to attack it. Up until that point, we were making it up as we went along, and that framework really helped drive us through and actually gave us more of a purpose, if you like. I think the other side, in terms of the solar roof, was we were struggling. I was going on the internet, I was finding suppliers, and then when I got to something like the financial due diligence, there's no way that we were going to give a £200,000 contract to a business of that size or scope. fortunately, I met you on a conference, a webinar, and you introduced me to the green economy and Vicky. And that made our life so simple in terms of finding a solar supplier for the PV cells, because we were running around in the wash. There was that many people who seemed to be able to claim that they could do it, but actually didn't have the substance. Vicky introduced us to 4 suppliers, and we've gone ahead with one of them, and we're now at the stage where we're getting ready to do the final proposal, work out exactly what we've got, and we can then move ahead in the early in next year.
Absolutely fantastic, John. Last question for me then, and I'll put my colleagues at the Growth Hub on the spot here. When do you think we might be able to come down and see you for the ribbon cutting ceremony? When are those panels going to be commissioned?
Well, I'm hoping it will be up and running in February next year. That might be a bit cold. We might delay it until March, Johnny, just to give us a bit of a buffer and a bit of warmth.
That's very at least it'll help with chilling the champagne when we get there anyway, if we have it a bit earlier in the year. Very good. Wonderful. John, really good to connect with you again. Really pleased to hear that the project's going really well, and wish you all the best getting it over the line. You've teed up very nicely our next speaker, Vicky, who's going to talk a little bit more about what you touched on, which is the support that's available from the Green Economy team to businesses who are looking for a little bit of help in terms of finding local suppliers and installers. So thank you very much, John. And if we can hand over to you, Vicky, to walk us through the Green Economy offer, please.
Oh, what an introduction. Thanks, John. So as Johnny said, I'm Vicky Wilding. Excuse me. I'm a senior business advisor at Green Economy. And for those of you that don't know, Green Economy brings together the installers, tradespeople and professionals the UK requires to deliver the transition to net zero in one single network. We support the suppliers to develop and grow, while our unrivaled support and knowledge of the supply chain means we can help buyers like John find their perfect project partners. And our mission is to build a greener net zero economy powered by local suppliers by improving the competitiveness of the green tech and service supply chain and increasing the confidence in the sector. So, as Johnny's pointed out, I'm here this morning to introduce you to our marketplace, which can help you identify green tech products and services. So, as Alistair has brilliantly explained, there's lots of green tech products and services that businesses can start to think about in regards to reducing your energy consumption. And as we've already mentioned, the energy bill relief scheme is only in place for 6 months. So the time to act now, you have a grace period to start thinking about these technologies and services. And those technologies and services could be renewables, such as solar and heat pumps. And we're hearing from industry that there's about a 4 to 6 month lead time from quotation to install. There could be things that Alistair's mentioned, such as LED lighting, and there's others too. Voltage optimization and power correction will help you reduce your energy demand, and things such as sensors will help you reduce your usage. So the marketplace is a tool that's designed to connect buyers with trusted local suppliers, and you can search the marketplace and filter it between location, service, and accreditations. So anybody can use the marketplace by visiting our website, and you can do that search yourselves. You can then make direct inquiries with suppliers that met your search criteria. Or alternatively, like John, you can reach out to me or somebody from the team, and we can do bespoke searches for you. We hold a lot more information on our suppliers than what you can just search on. And then we can sort of, like John, hold your hand through the process in terms of identifying the suppliers that meet your search criteria. And then, like John said, we organised a meet the buyer and supplier session for him. So the marketplace is there as a tool to help you as a buyer of those green tech products and services easier. So that's the marketplace there. So if I could leave you with just a couple of points today, the Green Economy's mission is to ensure that your journey to net zero isn't just the right choice, it's also the easiest choice, so we can connect you with those local supply chains. Advisors from the Business Growth Hub and Green Economy can support you in this process. And my last and final point is the time to act is now. Thank you.
Vicky, thank you very much. Wonderful segue through from John's presentation and conversation.
No, it's like we planned it, Johnny.
It's like we planned it, absolutely. I think it's fair to say, Vicky, isn't it, that it's you talked about that lead-in time that businesses will experience at the moment in terms of getting an installer on board. There's a step before that as well, quite often, which is getting an installer to even answer the phone at the moment, because they are, in a good way, in a lot of ways, they're incredibly busy because demand for their services has shot up over the last 6 to 12 months. Would you expect that the relationships that you've got with businesses, with suppliers, to make the journey a little bit smoother for the likes of John and others who are trying to get things like panels on roofs?
Pardon, what was it? Yes, so yeah, we have those connections with the suppliers, and we're regularly talking to them. So we send out weekly news to our members, and we can talk to them directly through our marketplace, and we also have advisors on the ground talking to them. So we're getting that information from them in terms of lead times, but we're also putting those real opportunities to them as well. So it's a connection service. Good.
That's what we like to hear. As smooth and as easy as possible for the Johns of the world who are looking to get these sorts of projects delivered. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Vicky. You can see more questions coming in as well, so I think there'll be a few for you at the back end. Okay, excuse me. Our final speaker for this morning, I'm delighted to be able to welcome Phoebe Baker. Phoebe is the EMS account manager at the Pilot Group. For those of you who don't know the Pilot Group, they play an incredible role across the region, supporting businesses to reduce their energy bills and carbon emissions. So looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that this morning, Phoebe. To kick us off, can you introduce the Pilot Group and what is it that you do there?
Yeah, of course. The Pilot Group, as you say, well, they're a Northwest business. They've been running for about 30 years. We've recently had our 30th birthday party in April. And it's a family-run business owned by a brother and sister who sort of have a massive care and passion for sustainability. Essentially, Pilot Group are a group of companies which design and implement technologies to create a smart, safe and sustainable workplace to essentially help businesses pave their way to reduce carbon and consumption, and also help them develop a strategy to essentially pave the way to a net zero journey as well. We've got 3 divisions within that group that sort of underpin our mission statement of smart, safe and sustainable. So we've got the first division that is a traffic safety control system. We've also got an EV charging division as well, an electrical vehicle charging division too. And then we've also got my division, which it focuses on energy management systems, where we actually design and implement a control system to essentially take control of the highest energy user appliances within a building to ultimately reduce the consumption of those items, and also provide insightful data to essentially make informed decisions in the future around other energy saving projects.
Wonderful stuff. Thank you very much. So, and we've touched on it a little bit, haven't we, already in the conversation this morning? Energy management, getting your hands on your data, understanding which appliances are using the most energy. It's not always the most exciting place for some businesses to start. They want to jump to the panels on roofs and the shiny EVs in their car park, don't they? Get us a little bit excited about energy management systems and why that's such an important place to start.
Yeah, of course. So I think, especially within the industry, energy management systems can sort of mean a whole harem of different things. But sort of in the context of Pilot Group, there's sort of 2 sides of the coin with what I'm sort of about to say with this point, really. Our energy management system is essentially a control system, like I've said, which is designed to take control of the highest energy user appliances, that ultimately reduces the consumption of those appliances by a guaranteed 25%. But ultimately what we've seen over the last 3 years is that we're averaging around 40% savings. And how we sort of do that is through various control strategies that we embed within the hardware and the software, essentially through dotting sensors around the building. We've got optimization programs and weather compensation, and also one of our patented technology control strategies, which is called the synchronous burner control, which is essentially designed to make use of residual heat of such as like gas appliances and things like that. The other side of the coin is that we actually, once we've taken control of those items, we can essentially monitor the running of those items and provide an inferred usage and cost of the items that we're essentially taking control of, which ultimately, and I think a lot of everyone's spoken about today, is that that's the important tool for businesses, is essentially to make those informed decisions and actually actively reduce your consumption. You essentially need to know the baseline of your energy consumption. So from our perspective, having the control system in place, not only does it give the client essentially confidence that the equipment is now being managed in the most efficient way, which essentially is a quick win for us, but also on top of that, we're essentially giving the business the data that they need to essentially have a greater understanding of their energy consumption, when and where it's being consumed, and ultimately have a whole complete picture of what their where their energy consumption is being consumed, so then they can start to make those informed decisions and get excited about essentially the further energy saving projects that they can take forward.
Fantastic. I'm excited about energy management systems. Hopefully a few others are online now. How does that first phone call go? So I'm wondering, there's probably a few people on the call this morning going, I think I quite like the sound of one of these things. I might give Phoebe a call. Do businesses need to have a really good understanding of what they're asking for? You know, do people come to you and say, it's sensors over here, it's these bits of equipment, I need my dashboard to look like X, Y, and Z? Or is the conversation sometimes Phoebe, can you help? I need to do something with my energy bills.
Predominantly, we do get those types of clients where, you know, they're very sort of switched on in the sense of they know what they need to change on site. I would say the majority of the clients that we do speak to really just are crying out for help. You know, I really sort of understood when, I can't remember who said it was, about essentially about 63% of clients are actually needing help in the respect of access to information and guidance in that respect. So from our point of view, a client can not really understand, essentially all they're seeing is a gas bill that's increasing, an electricity bill that they're getting that is essentially increasing month on month in that respect. And they really, really just need some essentially guidance and someone to help them sort of plan a way forward to ultimately reduce that energy consumption. From our side of things, when we do visit a client, and especially what we've seen over the last 6 months, is that the calling is saying our gas bills are increasing. I mean, the biggest increase that I've actually seen is around 213% on someone's gas bill. You know, essentially they've gone from a £9,000 spend to something that now is 80 to 90% at 90 grand. And also from that perspective, as much as the bills are going up, a lot of businesses don't seem to understand the items that they've got within the building, sort of the age of those items, their efficiency rating, and ultimately how they're controlled. And also from one side as well is that they're getting a massive electricity bill that they don't really understand what's actually essentially made up of that electricity bill, and there's no real breakdown of actually where they're essentially consuming electricity over the course of the day and ultimately over the course of it on an annual basis as well. So that's sort of what we see first off the bat when we're interacting with a client, really.
No, I think that's really helpful, just to get a sense of, you know, how well informed do people need to be before they can pick up the phone to you. And I think what I'm hearing is you can have a conversation with people at whatever stage they're at in their journey, right the way from I just need some help and I don't really know exactly what with, right the way through to I've got a good understanding and it's in the following areas. So let's assume on the back of this morning's session, we've got a number of people on the call say that sounds great, really like the sound of what the pilot group have got to offer. Can you just walk us through a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of what does the process actually look like, particularly in terms of getting bits of kit installed? What does the system actually look like once it's up and running? Yeah,
so once we've sort of been to site and really uncovered what the business is facing in terms of energy challenges and operational challenges, it will either be myself or one of my colleagues that will undergo a site survey in the respect of looking at all of the equipment on site, any quick wins that we can make in regards to doors being left open, windows being left open. And then once we've sort of gone away, developed a spec, analysed the gas or electricity bills, and essentially promised what we can save in the respective things, what we essentially do is install a main panel, which has got an inbuilt 4G router, so it can actually be accessed from any internet-enabled device through an online portal. And we essentially, how we integrate with the items within a building, we install our control boxes and also various sensors dotted around the building and externally around the building as well. And then it's a hardwired system, it's not a wireless system. And then the actual installation time of one of these systems is pretty non-disrupted to a business's working environment. We've got engineers who have been working with us for 30 years and normally predominantly have been in office spaces and production areas all the time. So it can be quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Adaptive in the respect of an installation and things like that. Once the system's actually installed and we've essentially got all the nuts and bolts integrated with various items around a building, it all goes back to a central hub, which essentially is accessed online. You can essentially set time and temperature regimes up for the items that we're controlling, but more importantly, we have the monitoring platform through the system as well. And it's not just sort of for one site as well. We do have multi-site capability where people can access the system essentially at group level. We've got one particular client where we've got 70 builders, merchant stores, where essentially they've standardized all the times and temperatures for each of, well, for the portfolio. So ultimately they can sort of really do some analysis on the respects of why a building might be consuming more to another in the respect of the age of that building, the insulation, because ultimately they've dealt with such a quick win. And then from the reporting side as well, we've got various charts page where you can actually see temperatures that have been set up in inferred usage and inferred cost. And essentially we'll store that data for around 10 years and it can be exported into Excel documents for essentially their own business's analysis then.
Excellent. That's really helpful. Just starts to bring it to life a little bit. What does the process actually look like once people have picked up the phone to you? Wonderful. I've got one last one for you before we step into the Q&A. So I'll use this as a quick nudge for our attendees to get any last questions in before the Q&A. But just before that, last question for you, Phoebe. The Pilot Group are running a competition at the moment for business to get a free energy management system. Can you just give us a quick overview of that and how businesses might get involved?
Yeah, of course. So as I've sort of said at the beginning of the call, we're a Northwest business, and because we're out in the field so much with clients and the problems that they're facing with such massive increases in cost, Pilot Group, we do a lot within the community already, but I suppose the reason as to why we've actually created this competition is we want to help a business from a respect of not only reducing their energy consumption, but also helping limit the damage caused by the massive increases of cost as well. So the competition is predominantly for Northwest businesses. You can apply through our website or you can contact me directly, where I'll be able to give you some instruction of how to apply, but also you can follow us on LinkedIn in the respect of there's links through LinkedIn that you're able to apply through the competition too. I have to say the competition is only open for another 24 hours. It has been open for a good 2 weeks now. So if you are sort of interested in actually applying and seeing what it's about, we sort of need it in the next day. And then I imagine we'll be announcing the winner of that competition in around a week and a half's time. But ultimately the competition is for a control of gas appliances to ultimately reduce the consumption by a guaranteed 25% to 40%.
Excellent. What I'm hearing is the Pilot Group are here to help very much. So for one lucky business, that's going to be some free help. And even if you're not helpful, even if you're not successful in that competition, it sounds like there's all sorts of ways you can help. Baby, that's been really, really interesting. Thank you very much for that 10-minute gallop through the Pilot Group. We may well come back to you in the Q&A, but for now, thank you very much. We've got 10 minutes left now, and we've had some really good questions come through already in the chat. Do please keep them coming through. I am going to wrap us up by 10 o'clock, so let's jump in and get through as many of these as we can. Alistair, I think this first one might be for you. It's around financing options. How receptive are banks to loan money in the particular climate for businesses who are looking to access cash?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, every company's circumstances are different, but in terms of appetite, it actually, some of the greener technologies, they are very much more receptive now, mainly because they can see the returns. So they know that, for example, a solar panel project, financing that over 10 years, if that was a project, say it was 4 or 5 years ago, financing it over 10 years, you would get yourself a 10% return, and they know that they're going to get their money back. Nowadays, your return on that investment internally can be less than 5 years, 4 years even. So the banks can see there is generation of money and income from that, and they can see where that security and if you're asset financing as well, it's even easier. So yeah, many more of them have taken, and like I say, most of the high street banks have got some form of a green loan scheme, and they are pretty good at responding to those.
Yeah, no, that's really useful. I think some of the headlines that have been jumping out for me around the costs of solar panels and what that's done to payback periods. So the first project we did as a business, 20-year payback when we put panels on some Electricity Northwest roofs. Second project, a 10-year payback, and you're now talking to businesses that are doing projects with 4 and 5 year paybacks. So this stuff just makes financial sense, whether or not you're interested in reducing your carbon emissions. Really good, Alistair. Thank you. I'm going to come to perhaps John for the next one. We touched on this a little bit around getting your workforce engaged. You mentioned that, John, as one of your priorities for Ellard, 100% engagement of your colleagues. What do they think about the agenda we're talking about this morning, and what have you done to get them engaged and, dare I say, excited about it?
I mean, I think that was probably our biggest mistake when we first started off 18 months ago. We didn't get that engagement through all the staff. So since the beginning of this year, we've taken on 2 initiatives. First one is we've created, gone for more of a ESG, environmental, social and governance approach, and we've trained all the staff in that. So they've now got a good understanding of what we're about and where we're going to go. And we're now actually taking that down to another level, which will start in the new year, in that by the end of this year, the entire senior management team will all be certified carbon literate. I will become a trainer, and the idea is next year, everybody in Ellard is going to be certified as carbon literate, and it will become part of our induction process. And I think that's really important to embed that culture into the company, because you can't pick it up from the top. You've got to have everybody from the bottom pushing it upwards. And things are now starting to change, and it's really good because it makes my job a lot easier, to be honest.
Yeah, fantastic. And for colleagues online who've perhaps not heard of the carbon literacy scheme before, do you just want to give us 30 seconds on what that is?
Yeah, the Carbon Literacy Project was started actually in Manchester. And the idea is to make sure that everybody is fully aware of actually what's going on in the world, and what we can actually do about it as individuals, as families, and even as workplaces. And so actually that tie-in between helping people at home, which is really important now as an employer. We want to be an employer of choice at Ellard. So actually helping people to get through what they want to get through is really important. But it also has that benefit that then transcends into the business organisation. And if we actually then get that profitable growth, we've got more money to be able to redistribute to our staff. So it really is very, very important to us.
Yeah, Yeah, and Vicky, is that something that you're seeing in what we might call a green business, a provider of low carbon technologies and services? What does this sector look like at the moment? And is it a sector that's growing purely driven by local demand? Is it being driven by government policy? Is it attracting those sorts of workers who want to be doing some good in the world? Give us a little bit of a state of the nation in terms of Greater Manchester's low carbon technology sector.
So the sector in Greater Manchester is booming, it's growing, which is really good. But what we are seeing is a big skills gap. So the people on the ground doing the installing of those products and services. So there is things happening in the background in regards to upskilling workforces. But I think the positive to take out of it is that the opportunities are there. There is the businesses like Ellard wanting to install those different types of tech. So the opportunities for green tech businesses, especially in Greater Manchester at the moment, is absolutely huge.
Great stuff. And Phoebe, what are you finding in this space? Are you struggling to recruit? Are you finding that people are really enthusiastic about stepping into the world of energy management and helping businesses to reduce their carbon emissions?
100%. I think more and more, especially people who are coming new into the business, are very much wanting to make a difference within their own job, and having a product like ours, which essentially reduces the consumption and carbon emissions, which ultimately is the goal, UK wide. And it's actually quite ironic that I've actually got a new starter sitting in with me to actually listen to the call, who only joined us 2 weeks ago, and his actual reasoning for actually joining with us was because he wanted to make a difference in what he does in a day-to-day job. And that's what we're seeing in the workplace at the moment. So I wouldn't necessarily say we're struggling to recruit in our division. And it's also, I think from our perspective, it's about finding the right people who have that sort of value that we want to take forward, which is essentially making a difference.
Excellent. Vicky, I think we've got a speaker for one of the future sessions there, Phoebe's new colleague. So let's get that in the diary. Okay. I mean, there's a really nice circularity there, isn't there? Whether you're a kind of a technology and service provider in this sector, people want to come and work for you. And if you're a regular business, an Ellard of the world, you're also finding that your staff really want to get into this agenda, and they're expecting senior management to be engaged in it as well. And if they're not, I think there's a good chance you'll find people willing to move elsewhere for a business that does take this stuff more seriously. Okay, wonderful. I'm going to do one last question for you, Alistair, before we wrap up. There was a bit in the news yesterday about a review of the energy bill release, sorry, the domestic energy price support that government had put in place a few weeks ago. Do you want to just give us a quick headline on the domestic side of things, and then secondly, what you think that may or may not mean for the business version of it?
Effectively, the change as of yesterday was that the 2-year scheme for domestic has now been shortened, so it will come to an end for most in April next year, and there will be vulnerable support for vulnerable people in domestic setting. In terms of what that means for business, there was always the support scheme was available for 6 months for business with a review at 3 months. So as with all of these things and the way that politics is changing at the moment, that could change tomorrow. It could change in 2 hours' time. So what I would argue is that all of what we've heard today and all of the various different calls to action, there's never been a more important time to get on to it now to protect yourself, insulate yourself for the future price shocks that are coming in.
Wonderful, Alistair. Really good point to finish, and I think the time for action is now. I've heard that from you, heard that from Vicky. I think that's very much my takeaway from this morning's session. Okay, thank you all very much to my panel for those really interesting insights. The final thing from me before we let you go is just to signpost you through to the next in this series of webinars. Tuesday, the 25th of October. So we've got an afternoon session next time, 3 o'clock. And what we're going to be looking at here is a bit of advice, support, guidance for businesses who are looking for additional help to manage their costs and cash in this period of crisis that we're going through. And that's very much in the vein that we talked about right at the outset, which is the Growth Hub and partners are very much here to help. So hopefully this morning's session has given you what you were looking for from an energy point of view. There'll be more support available in next week's session. But in the meantime, if there's anything you think you might need from the Growth Hub, Electricity Northwest, or any of the colleagues you've heard from this morning, please do drop us a line and we're more than happy to help. For now, enjoy the rest of your day and we'll see you next time. Thank you.